Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. You might notice that this isn't a Subaru, this is a Nissan, a 2011 Nissan Maxima with a VQ35 V6. Most of you viewers that have been watching the channel this year have probably recognized this car. It was in this video, whichever corner, can't remember which way to point, that came a few months ago. Car came in with a bad misfire and it ended up having two burnt coils that were shorting. It had worn spark plugs and the rear cam cover was actually leaking oil into the spark plug tubes. So we replaced that rocker cover, cam cover, new spark plugs, and a 6-pack of new Hitachi ignition coils and sent it on its way. The customer about a month ago had an issue driving it to work. The car lost power and cut off on them. They got to work, could not get it to start, had to tow it home. When they got it home, they hooked jumper cables up to it trying to jump start it. They said smoke started coming out of the left-hand side of the engine bay. They had a burning smell and just disconnected the battery and shut the hood and didn't mess with it. It's been sitting, like I said, about a month now. It was just dropped off on the rollback to me, and I've gone through the diagnostic procedure already. I've already figured out what's wrong with it. I kind of did this backwards. I wasn't planning to film a video on it, but I might as well work backwards through it to show you guys how to diagnose, find shorts in your starting system. So let's go ahead and get into it. So guys, the first thing I did when the car arrived was I hooked the battery cables back up and hooked up my NOCO jump box. And when I powered it on, it gave me a warning for short circuit. So I immediately disconnected it and pulled the battery cables off. I did not want to risk blowing anything up. So, knowing that we have a short circuit in the system, it's time to figure out what has shorted in our starting system. So, started off by disconnecting and removing the negative battery cable. As you see, it's still disconnected, and I hooked the positive up. They had disconnected the positive and left the ground hooked up. I reversed it. So I got up my Fluke multimeter here and I set it to the continuity checker. Continuity checker basically just will beep when the two leads touch, telling you that something has continuity or is connected. So we'll put it on continuity checker real quick and I'll show you. Every time I touch the leads, you hear that beeping sound. And it'll give you a resistance reading in ohms. So when I would hook up one end to the negative battery cable that was disconnected and the other end to the positive battery terminal, I was getting continuity. So that confirmed that our power supply was shorting to ground somewhere. So from there, I decided the easiest way to go about it was to try to disconnect some of the high loads connected to the main battery cable lugs, which would be your starter with the main battery power feed to it and the alternator with the main battery power feed to it. On this model, the starter is located under the PCM and the battery and is hard to access. So to keep from having to disassemble all that, I went over to the alternator to start with. So it's going to be rather difficult to show you the alternator because it's buried way down here. It's not easy to get to like on a Subaru. One reason I love working on Subarus and I'm not a Nissan guy. So I went ahead and pulled the 12mm nut here off of the main power lug, the main power feed wire to the alternator. As you see here in my hand, have it disconnected. And as soon as I disconnected that main power wire from the alternator, continuity went away. So that tells me that our alternator is our issue. That's what has shorted out on us. And it makes sense compared to the story that the customer told us, that they saw smoking from the left side of the engine bay, which is where the alternator is located. They saw the burning, and makes sense that the alternator would be causing a burning smell if it is shorted. So went ahead and pulled that out of the circuit, pulled it up here. Should have taped it up just to be safe, but I hooked it to my bungee ground lead here just to keep it from contacting anything. I'll hook the NOCO box back up. The overload or short circuit message was gone. I already confirmed that with the multimeter, but now that I have that out of the way, I can go ahead and turn the jump box on and start the engine to see if it'll start, because in this kind of issue, especially being the alternator, a main load shorting out like that to ground, They could have possibly fried the PCM, all sorts of modules, and have, you know, a big repair bill. Luckily, that wasn't the case here. I was able to jump start it, and the engine started and ran just fine, which it will without the alternator hooked up and producing voltage, as long as the jump box is on and powering it. So right now I'll go ahead and do that. I'll hook it back up and fire the engine up for you guys. So you can see that's what my issue was, and that it runs like it should. We do have a check engine light on. Have not scanned it, but that's a good sign. If your check engine light didn't come on when you put power to the car, that would be a sign, or could be a sign, that your PCM has fried or is dead. So when I saw that check engine light, I was relieved to know that the PCM was awake and communicating to some degree. As you see, the engine is running, so pretty much 100%, no doubt, confirmed our alternator was the issue. Now the hard part is getting the alternator out of a front-wheel drive VQ35 vehicle. And as soon as I cut power on the jump box, our engine dies because our alternator is not producing voltage and our battery is flat dead. So got the continuity checker hooked up. Let me show you guys that real quick. Well, let you hear it. I can't show you really, just because of where the alternator is located at. So we got the ground lead there on the negative battery cable. We got the positive lead here. I'm going to put it on the positive lug of the alternator. And as you see, our alternator is shorted through the engine block and back into the negative side of the system. No good. Confirmed 100%, alternator is internally shorted in a big way. All right guys, it's the next day. I just installed our new reman alternator, and sorry for not filming that replacement, but this is the first time I've ever replaced an alternator on this particular year model of Maxima, and I was learning as I went. I don't like to teach as I learn, because if I'm trying to teach you, I'd rather have done it a couple times and know how to show you the quickest, most efficient way to do it. So it's replaced. There's plenty of other videos on YouTube if you need to know how to specifically replace it, but it is a very large undertaking. You have to remove the cooling fans. You have to discharge the air conditioning system and remove one of the air conditioning lines. You have to drain the coolant, have to remove 3 coolant lines. You have to remove the serpentine belt. You have to remove 2 idler pulleys. You have to disconnect the AC compressor clutch. You have to disconnect one of the VVT solenoids for the camshaft. You have to move wiring out of the way. It is a big undertaking. Super used to Subarus, and why I love working on them. Take the belt off, take 2 12mm bolts loose, take the power wire loose, take the connector loose, 5 minutes, bingo bammo, Subaru alternator's done. This, on the other hand, I feel bad for you Nissan techs. So as you see, we've got the spill-free coolant funnel hooked up. I've got the system topped up as much as I can get it to take right now. Scan tool is hooked up under the dash. Going to go ahead and jump start it, run the engine and bleed the cooling system, check everything over, should be good to return it to the customer. Good sign that it kept running after we took the power off the jump box. So we're just gonna let it run, hook the scanner up. We're gonna open up live data stream for engine coolant temp and monitor that. Make sure that our fans cycle, make sure that our thermostat opens, make sure we bleed all the air from the cooling system. All right guys, so I'm curious to see what actually went wrong in this alternator. There's a core on it, so I gotta return it. But before we do that, let's tear it apart and see what went wrong, or try to see what went wrong in it. All right, nut off. Hopefully the pulley comes off fairly easily. Perhaps it won't. All right, guys, not exactly sure what has shorted out in this alternator. I'm not going to dig into it too deep because I really don't care that much, but we see a nice burn up spot here. Something back here has shorted to the outside of the case to ground. Looks like all of this is pretty charred. Everything stinks like it's been smoked out, which the customer said happened. So gonna go throw it back together, throw it back in the box, take it back to the parts house for the core return, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.